The autumn rain fell like tears from a grieving sky, turning the Ethelmoor battlefield into a canvas of mud and crimson. Arryn pressed her back against the shattered remains of a supply wagon, her healer's satchel clutched to her chest as thunder rumbled overhead. The war between humans and elves had raged for 3 brutal years, but tonight's clash had been the worst she'd witnessed. The valley still echoed with the groans of the dying and the unsettling silence of those beyond help. She was 24 years old, with earth-brown hair perpetually escaping her braid and hands stained with more blood than she cared to remember. As a battlefield healer attached to the human forces, Arryn had learned to navigate the thin line between courage and foolishness. Tonight, she'd crossed that line by staying behind when her unit retreated. Just a few more, she whispered to herself, the mantra that kept her moving through the carnage. Just a few more souls to save. The moon emerged from behind storm clouds, casting silver light across the devastated field. That's when she saw him, partially buried beneath the bodies of 3 human soldiers, an arm extended as if reaching for something beyond death's door. At first glance, she assumed he was human. Then she noticed the telltale pointed ear, the silver embroidery on his armor that marked him as elven nobility, and the unmistakable rise and fall of labored breathing. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away. Elves were the enemy. They'd burned villages, slaughtered innocents, and shown no mercy to human prisoners. Her own brother had fallen to an elven arrow just 6 months prior. Yet as Arryn stared at the dying warrior, she saw only another life slipping away, and she'd sworn an oath to heal, not to judge. She stumbled through the mud, her boots squelching with each step. Up close, she could see his face, sharp aristocratic features softened by unconsciousness, pale as moonlight with blue-black hair matted with blood and rain. A massive wound split his side where a spear had found the gap in his armor. He couldn't have been older than 30 by human standards, though with elves, age was impossible to determine. "You're going to regret this, Arryn," she muttered as she dropped to her knees beside him. "If the humans don't hang you for treason, the elves will probably kill you for touching their precious royalty." She worked quickly, her practiced hands moving with efficiency born from too many battlefield emergencies. First, she checked his pulse, weak and thready but present. His skin was cold, body temperature dropping toward the point of no return. She tore away the damaged armor plating and cut through the blood-soaked tunic beneath. The spear wound was deep, potentially fatal. His lung might be punctured. From her satchel, Arryn retrieved her precious store of silverleaf, an herb that grew only in the high mountains and cost more than most farmers earned in a year. She'd been saving it for a critical emergency. As she crushed the leaves and mixed them with purified alcohol to create a poultice, she questioned her sanity. This elf could be responsible for dozens of human deaths. He might have killed people she knew, but when she placed her hands over his wound, channeling the healing warmth that was her gift, her doubts dissolved into focus. The magic that flowed through her fingers wasn't about politics or war. It was about life refusing to surrender to death. She felt his body respond, cells knitting, blood vessels repairing, the terrible internal damage slowly reversing. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold rain. This level of healing would drain her completely. An hour passed, then 2. The storm intensified, as if nature itself was trying to wash away the horror of what humans and elves had done to each other in this valley. Arryn's hands trembled with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop until his breathing steadied, until his color improved from deathly pale to merely ashen. Finally, she slumped backward, gasping. The elf's wound had closed to a manageable injury. He'd live, though he'd need days of rest and additional treatment. As if sensing his improved condition, his eyes fluttered open, and Arryn found herself staring into irises of molten gold that seemed to glow with their own inner light. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. His gaze traveled from her face to her mud-splattered healer's tunic with its human military insignia, then to his own bandaged torso. Confusion flickered across his features, followed by what might have been wonder or fear. She couldn't tell which. Why? His voice was barely a whisper, accented with the musical lilt characteristic of the High Elves. "Because you were dying," Aren replied simply. "And I'm a healer." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "You're human, and you're elven. I noticed." She began repacking her satchel with shaking hands. "Don't try to move. You've lost a lot of blood, and that wound will reopen if you're not careful. You need rest, food, and my soldiers long gone. Both armies withdrew hours ago. It's just corpses and carrion birds out here now." She met his golden eyes steadily. "And apparently 2 idiots with poor survival instincts. Despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. "I am Cailan, of House Silverthorn." The name hit her like a physical blow. Everyone in Ethelmore knew that name. Prince Cailan Silverthorn, heir to the Eternal Throne, commander of the Eastern Elven Legions, the Silver Death, who'd personally led the assault on Thornhaven. The elf responsible for more human casualties than any other enemy commander. She'd just saved the most dangerous elf alive. "I don't care who you are," Aren lied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Right now you're just another patient." She stood on unsteady legs. "There's a cave system about a quarter-mile north. Can you walk?" "I believe so. Then we need to move before someone comes back to loot the bodies. If the human forces find me with you, they'll execute us both." Cailan struggled to his feet with visible effort. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, and even weakened, he moved with the lethal grace of a trained warrior. Aren ducked under his arm, supporting his weight as they stumbled away from the battlefield. Each step was agony for him, she could tell, but he made no sound of complaint. The cave, she remembered, turned out to be little more than an overhang, but it was dry and hidden from casual view. Aren helped Cailan settle against the stone wall, then collapsed beside him, utterly spent. Her magic was depleted, her body screaming for rest. "You asked why I saved you," she said quietly, watching rain pour like a curtain across the cave entrance. "The truth is, I don't know if I made the right choice. You've probably killed people I knew, friends, maybe even family members." She turned to look at him. "But out there on that field, all I saw was someone dying. And I couldn't walk away from that." Cailan was silent for a long moment. "Your name?" "Aren, just Aren. No noble house, no fancy title. I'm the daughter of an apothecary from Millbrook Village. Aren, who heals even her enemies." His golden eyes studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "The legends speak of humans with such conviction, though I confess I thought them myths. Well, here's your proof. Myths can be exhaustingly real." She pulled her cloak tighter against the cold. "Rest now. By morning, you should be strong enough to find your own people. And you. What will you do?" "Go home, I suppose. Back to Millbrook. Back to making tonics for farmers and treating children's fevers. Back to pretending this war doesn't exist." She smiled bitterly. "Though I doubt I'll ever forget this particular mistake." It was no mistake. Cailan's voice carried a weight she didn't. Erin arrived in Millbrook just after noon, muddy and exhausted, with a story about becoming separated from her unit during the chaos of retreat. The village healer, old Mistress Kara, scolded her soundly before embracing her with relief. No one questioned her account too closely. In wartime, soldiers and support personnel went missing all the time, and those who returned were simply grateful to be alive. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. Idrin spent her days in the apothecary, grinding herbs, mixing tinctures, and treating the ailments of villagers who couldn't afford to think about distant battles. Millbrook was small, maybe 200 souls nestled in a valley between forested hills, and sufficiently remote that the war felt like something happening to other people. Until it didn't. 3 days after the battlefield, Aren woke before dawn to a sound that froze her blood. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it carried a rhythm, deliberate, measured, relentless. War drums. And they were getting closer. She rushed to her window, throwing open the shutters. In the pre-dawn darkness, she could see lights, thousands of them dotting the hills that surrounded Millbrook like stars fallen to earth. Torches, campfires, "An army! Gods preserve us," she whispered. Bells began ringing throughout the village, the alarm that meant danger approaching. Erin dressed frantically and ran outside to find chaos. People emerged from their homes, confused and terrified. Millbrook had no walls, no garrison, no defenses worth mentioning. They were farmers and craftspeople, not soldiers. Everyone to the common. Mayor Brendan's voice cut through the panic. "Stay calm. We don't know what this is yet." But Arryn knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the full scope of their situation became horrifyingly clear. Elven forces had surrounded Millbrook completely, not a raiding party or scouting unit, but a full military deployment. Thousands of soldiers in gleaming armor stood in perfect formation on every hill, every road, every path leading in or out of the village. Their banners displayed the silver tree of the Silverthorn dynasty, and at the forefront of the largest contingent stood a command pavilion of white silk that seemed to glow in the morning light. The villagers gathered in the common, 200 frightened souls clutching whatever weapons they could find, farming tools, mostly laughably inadequate against trained warriors. Arryn stood near the front, her heart hammering. She scanned the elven ranks, looking for what confirmation of her worst fears. She found it when the command pavilion opened and he emerged. Cailan Silverthorn looked nothing like the dying man she'd saved. He wore ceremonial armor of silver and white, a flowing cloak the color of midnight, and a circlet of twisted mithril that marked his royal status. He moved with absolute confidence, no trace of the weakness that had nearly killed him. Behind him walked a dozen other elves in elaborate armor, his honor guard, she assumed, and they approached Millbrook with the measured pace of those who knew they held all the power. They stopped 50 yards from the gathered villagers. The silence was absolute, broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet and the snap of elven banners in the morning breeze. "People of Millbrook," Cailan's voice carried across the common, clear and commanding. "I am Prince Cailan Silverthorn, heir to the Eternal Throne, commander of the Eastern Legions. I've come seeking one among you, a healer named Arryn." The crowd erupted in frantic whispers, heads turned, searching. Arryn felt eyes landing on her, felt the weight of her neighbor's fear and confusion. Mayor Brendan, standing beside her, grabbed her arm. "What did you do?" he hissed. "I saved his life," she whispered back. "On the battlefield," Brendan's face went white. "You healed the Elven Prince? Are you insane?"
"They'll think we're collaborators."
"They'll burn—" "Wait!" Arryn pulled free and stepped forward, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "I'm Arryn. I'm the healer you're looking for." Cailan's golden eyes found her, and something unreadable passed across his features. "Step forward, Arryn of Millbrook." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The elven army had them trapped. If she didn't cooperate, the village would suffer. She walked toward Cailan with her head high, aware that her neighbors were watching, judging, probably already condemning her as a traitor. When she stood before him, Cailan studied her with that same intense gaze she remembered from the cave. Up close, she could see the faint scar on his side where the spear wound had been, a mark that would fade in time but never completely disappear. "You disappeared before I could properly thank you," he said quietly. For her ears alone, I didn't want thanks. I wanted to go home. And yet here I am, having brought the war to your doorstep. His expression was serious, almost apologetic. "The law of my people is clear, Arryn. You saved the life of the heir to the throne. This creates a blood debt of the highest order, one that must be acknowledged before my entire court and army. I release you from any debt," Arryn said quickly. "Just take your army and leave these people alone. They've done nothing. It's not that simple." Cailan turned to address both her and the gathered villagers. "The blood debt must be repaid in full, according to our ancient customs. Arryn of Millbrook saved my life when she had every reason to let me die. For this, I am bound by honor to offer her a choice." He gestured, and 2 of his guards brought forward an ornate wooden chest. They opened it to reveal contents that made the villagers gasp. Gold coins, precious gems, bolts of fine fabric, and objects of clearly magical nature that glowed with soft light. The first choice, Kaelin announced, is wealth beyond measure. Enough to make you and your village prosperous for generations. You would want for nothing. I would also guarantee protection for Millbrook. No elven force would ever threaten this place or its people. It was a staggering offer. Arin could see the hope kindling in her neighbor's eyes. That much gold could transform their lives. But she could also hear what Kaelin wasn't saying. Accept the wealth, and she'd be marking Millbrook as collaborators. Human forces would see them as traitors. They'd be isolated, dependent on elven protection, caught between two warring sides. And the second choice? She asked, though she already suspected what he'd say. Kaelin's expression grew more serious. The second choice is to accompany me back to the elven court, to stand at my side as my life debt bearer, a position of tremendous honor among my people. You would leave your human life behind, live among elves, and serve as living proof that mercy and honor can transcend the boundaries of war. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. Shouts of protest, anger, fear. Mayor Brendan pushed forward. You can't ask her to do this. She's one of us. This is kidnapping dressed up as honor. It is a choice freely given, Kaelin replied calmly. And the third option, if she refuses both, is that I leave immediately and the debt remains unpaid, a situation that dishonors both of us and leaves this village vulnerable. Without the protection my presence guarantees, Millbrook stands directly in the path of the war's next phase. Other commanders on both sides will not be as considerate. Arin felt trapped in a nightmare. All around her, villagers were arguing, crying, begging her to take the gold, to refuse, to make whatever choice would save them. She caught sight of Mistress Kara's weathered face, saw the old healer's sadness and understanding. Might I have a moment to consider? Arin asked. Kaelin nodded. Of course. But Arin, know this. If you choose to come with me, I swear on my honor that you will be treated with respect and that you may leave whenever you wish. You would not be a prisoner, but a guest of the highest status. She walked back to the crowd, to Mayor Brendan and Mistress Kara, and all the faces she'd known her entire life. Her mind raced through possibilities. If she took the gold, Millbrook would become a target for human forces. If she refused everything, the village would be left defenseless as the war intensified. But if she went with Kaelin, don't do it, Brendan urged. Don't sacrifice yourself for us. He's the enemy, another villager added. They've killed our soldiers, burned our towns, and we've killed theirs. Arin interrupted quietly. I've seen the battlefield. There's enough blood on both sides to drown in. She looked at Mistress Kara. What should I do? The old healer took her hands. Child, I've taught you everything I know about healing, but some choices you have to make with your heart, not your head. She glanced toward Kaelin. That elf prince. He didn't have to come here himself. He could have sent emissaries, gold, empty promises. But he came in person with his entire army to honor a debt to a human healer. That tells me something about his character, or it's an elaborate trap, Brendan muttered. She turned back to Kaelin, walking through the silent crowd. The elven prince watched her approach, his expression carefully neutral, but she thought she saw something in his golden eyes. Hope, perhaps, or respect for the difficulty of her choice. I'll come with you, Arin said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Not for the gold, not for the honor. I'll come because maybe, just maybe, I can do more good trying to bridge the gap between our peoples than I can hiding in my village, pretending the war doesn't exist. Gasps and protests erupted behind her, but she raised her hand. Mayor Brendan, take the chest of gold anyway. Use it to fortify the village, to help families who've lost breadwinners to the war. And Prince Kaelin, I want your word, sworn before all these witnesses, that Millbrook will be protected regardless of my choice. Kaelin inclined his head. You have my word, sworn on the honor of House Silverthorn and witnessed by my army. Millbrook and its people are under my personal protection. Any who harm them will answer to me. Then I'm ready. The farewell was chaos, Mistress Kara crying and pressing her personal grimoire of healing recipes into Arin's hands. Neighbors torn between gratitude and accusation. Children staring with wide eyes at the elven soldiers. Arryn packed a single bag with her belongings, changed into her best dress, and emerged to find a magnificent white horse waiting for her. Kaelin helped her mount, then swung onto his own steed with fluid grace. "You're brave," he said quietly. "Braver than most warriors I've known." "I'm terrified," Arryn admitted. "But that's never stopped me from doing what needs to be done." As they rode out of Millbrook, surrounded by thousands of elven soldiers, Arryn looked back one last time at the only home she'd ever known. The villagers watched her departure with expressions ranging from relief to betrayal, and she wondered if she'd ever see them again. The war drums began their rhythm once more as the army moved out, and Arryn rode beside a prince toward an uncertain future, carrying nothing but a healer's bag and a desperate hope that mercy might prove stronger than hate. The journey to the Elven court took 4 days through terrain that grew progressively more otherworldly. They left behind the familiar rolling hills and farmland of human territory, crossing into the ancient forests of the Deepwood, where trees grew so tall their tops disappeared into permanent mist. The Elven army moved with eerie silence through these woods. No shouted orders, no clatter of armor. Just thousands of warriors flowing like water along paths invisible to Arryn's eyes. Kaelin rode beside her for most of the journey, though he was often called away to consult with his commanders. When present, he proved to be surprisingly good company, answering her endless questions about elven culture with patient detail. She learned that the life debt she'd created was one of the oldest and most sacred bonds in elven society, superseding even family obligations. She learned that Kaelin himself was 127 years, old young by elven standards, and that he'd become a military commander not by choice, but by necessity when his older sister had died in the war's early days. "My father blames himself," Kaelin said on the 3rd evening as they camped beneath trees so ancient they seemed to breathe with their own magic. "He never wanted this war, but 3 years ago, human settlers attacked one of our sacred groves, cut down a heart tree that had stood for millennia. 60 elven caretakers were killed trying to defend it. My sister led the retaliation and didn't return." Arryn absorbed this quietly, watching firelight play across his aristocratic features. "I didn't know that's how it started. Most humans don't, most. Elves don't know that the settlers claimed they were defending themselves from elven raiders who'd been stealing supplies from border villages." He met her eyes. "The truth is, both sides have legitimate grievances. Both sides have committed atrocities, and neither side seems capable of breaking the cycle. Is that why you agreed to this life debt arrangement?" Arryn asked. "Because you see me as some kind of bridge between our peoples?" "Partly," Kaelin admitted, "but also because you saved my life without hesitation, without asking what I could do for you in return. That kind of pure compassion is rare in anyone, human or elf. It deserves to be honored, not exploited." He paused. "Though I confess, I also hope that bringing you to court might shake some of my people from their certainty that all humans are barbaric savages." "And you think I can do that?" "You already have." He gestured around the camp, where elven soldiers were going about their evening routines. Arryn noticed that several were watching her with curiosity rather than hostility. "My officers can't stop talking about the human healer who saved their prince's life. You've become something of a legend." The thought made her deeply uncomfortable. She was no legend, just a woman who'd made an impulsive choice on a battlefield and was now living with the consequences. On the 4th day, they crested a final hill, and Arryn saw the Elven court for the first time. She'd expected a castle, perhaps, or a walled city. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs. The capital of the Elven kingdom, Silverhaven, grew from the forest itself, or perhaps the forest grew around it. Enormous trees had been shaped over centuries into soaring towers and graceful halls, their living wood forming structures of impossible beauty. Walkways of woven branches connected the tree structures hundreds of feet above the ground, while at ground level, silverstone buildings nestled between massive roots. Waterfalls tumbled from elevated gardens, creating rainbows in the afternoon sun. The entire city glowed with soft bioluminescent light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "It's beautiful," Arryn whispered. "It's home," Kaelin replied. And for the first time, she heard genuine warmth in his voice. Their arrival created a sensation. As they rode through Silverhaven's gates, elven citizens stopped to stare. Arryn felt the weight of thousands of eyes, heard whispers in the liquid syllables of High Elvish. Some stares were curious, others openly hostile. She kept her head high and her expression calm, channeling every ounce of Mistress Kara's teachings about dignity under pressure. The royal palace stood at the city's heart, or rather, grew from it. A tree so massive it seemed impossible rose from the earth, its trunk wider than most human buildings. Spiral staircases wound up its exterior, leading to chambers carved within the living wood. At its base, guards in ceremonial armor flanked an entrance that appeared to be a natural opening in the tree, as if the ancient wood had welcomed visitors inside. Kaelin helped Arryn dismount, then offered his arm formally. "My father will want to meet you immediately. Try not to be intimidated. He's actually less terrifying than he appears." "That's not reassuring," Arryn muttered, but she took his arm. The interior of the palace tree was beyond anything in her experience. The walls were living wood that had been shaped into sweeping curves and elegant columns, all glowing with that same soft light she'd seen throughout the city. The floor was smooth stone, inlaid with silver patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Everything spoke of age beyond mortal comprehension and craftsmanship that bordered on magic. They ascended staircases and crossed elegant bridges that somehow existed inside the massive tree, finally arriving at a set of doors carved with intricate scenes of elven history. Guards opened them and Kaelin led Arryn into the throne room. King Aldrich Silverthorn sat upon a throne of living wood that appeared to have grown specifically to support him. He was ancient even by elven standards. His hair was silver white, his face lined with the weight of countless years. But his eyes were the same molten gold as his son's. He wore robes of deep green, embroidered with silver thread, and a crown of woven mithril and heartwood sat upon his brow. Beside him stood a woman who could only be the Queen, ethereally beautiful, with midnight hair and eyes like winter storms, and arrayed around the throne room were dozens of elven nobles in elaborate court dress. Everyone fell silent as Kaelin and Arryn approached the throne. The scrutiny was almost physical. Arryn felt her palms sweating, felt the weight of being the only human in a room full of beings who viewed her kind as enemies. But she'd faced death on battlefields and made impossible choices. She could face this. "Father," Kaelin said, his voice formal and carrying clearly through the chamber. "I present to you Arryn of Millbrook, the healer who saved my life on the battlefield of Ashenvale. She is my life debt bearer and an honored guest of House Silverthorn." King Aldrich rose from his throne and descended the dais. He was tall even for an elf, and he moved with a grace that belied his obvious age. He stopped before Arryn and studied her with an intensity that made Kaelin's scrutiny seem casual by comparison. "You are very young to have made such an impact on history," the king said finally. His voice was deep, resonant with power. "I'm just a healer, Your Majesty," Arryn replied, managing to keep her voice steady. "I did what any healer should do. I saved a life, even the life of your enemy." "I didn't see an enemy. I saw someone dying." A ripple went through the assembled nobles, surprise perhaps or disapproval. The king's expression remained unreadable. "My son tells me you came here voluntarily, that you could have chosen wealth instead." "I came because I believe that understanding between our peoples is more valuable than gold. I came because maybe if elves can see that humans are capable of mercy, and if I can learn that elves are more than the monsters our stories make them out to be, maybe there's hope for ending this war." It was bold, perhaps too bold. Several nobles made sounds of outrage, but King Aldrich's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You speak with refreshing honesty, child. Whether that honesty will be the death of you or your salvation remains to be seen." He turned to address the court. I declare Arryn of Millbrook to be a life debt-bearer of the crown, under the personal protection of House Silverthorn. Any who harm her harm the throne itself. She will be given chambers, attendants, and all courtesies due to a noble guest. The formal pronouncement seemed to settle something. The tension in the room eased fractionally. King Aldric gestured to a female elf who stepped forward. She was younger than most present, perhaps the equivalent of Arryn's own age, with copper-coloured hair and eyes like forest moss. This is Lady Silvera. She will serve as your guide and companion, helping you navigate court life and elven customs. The king's gaze sharpened. I suggest you learn quickly, Arryn of Millbrook. Not everyone here will be as welcoming as my son. Lady Silvera curtsied to the king, then turned to Arryn with a smile that seemed genuine. Come, let me show you to your quarters. You must be exhausted from the journey. As they left the throne room, Arryn glanced back once. Cailan stood before his father, the two of them engaged in what appeared to be intense discussion. The queen watched them both with an expression Arryn couldn't interpret, and the assembled nobles stared after her with looks ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Arryn followed Silvera through corridors of living wood, her mind reeling. She'd done it. She'd entered the heart of the Elven Kingdom. Now came the truly difficult part, surviving long enough to make a difference. They're going to hate you, you know, Silvera said conversationally as they climbed a spiral staircase. Most of them anyway. You're human. You represent everything we've been fighting against, and you've captured the attention of the Crown Prince. That makes you dangerous and fascinating in equal measure. You seem surprisingly friendly, Arryn observed. Silvera laughed, a sound like wind chimes. I'm a scholar, not a warrior. I've spent years studying human culture and language. I even lived among humans for a season before the war. I think this conflict is a tragedy that's destroyed both our peoples. She glanced at Arryn. So when I heard that a human healer had saved Prince Cailan's life and was coming to court, I volunteered immediately to be your companion. I want to help you succeed. Why? Because, Silvera said, stopping before an ornate door, if you can make even a small difference here, if you can show my people that humans are more than enemies, you might help end this war. And that's worth fighting for. She opened the door to reveal chambers that took Arryn's breath away. A circular room carved within the tree itself, with windows of crystal-clear glass overlooking the forest canopy. Furniture of polished wood and soft fabrics, a bed that looked impossibly comfortable, and bookshelves filled with volumes in both Elvish and common tongue. This is mine? Arryn asked in disbelief. This is yours, Silvera confirmed. Welcome to the Elven Court, Arryn of Millbrook. Your real journey starts now. 3 weeks passed in a blur of lessons, challenges, and small victories. Arryn threw herself into learning Elven customs and language with the same dedication she'd once applied to studying herbs and healing techniques. Silvera proved to be an excellent teacher and gradually a genuine friend. Together, they navigated the treacherous waters of court politics, where every gesture carried meaning and every conversation concealed layers of subtext. The nobles' reactions to Arryn's presence ranged from polite tolerance to open hostility. Lord Carathan, a military commander who'd lost his daughter to human forces, made no secret of his contempt. Lady Miriel, an ancient elf who served as the king's chief advisor, watched Arryn with calculating eyes and revealed nothing of her thoughts. But there were others, younger elves mostly, those tired of endless war, who approached her with cautious curiosity. Cailan remained a constant, complicated presence in her life. He was busy with military affairs and council meetings, but he made time to check on her progress nearly every day. Sometimes they walked through the palace gardens, discussing everything from healing techniques to philosophy. Other times, he invited her to observe council sessions, exposing her to the complex political realities that drove the war. She began to understand that the conflict wasn't simply good versus evil, but a tragic collision of legitimate fears, ancient grievances, and failures of communication on both sides. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning, when Silvara burst into Arin's chambers, her face pale with distress. "There's been an incident," she said breathlessly. "A group of human prisoners, soldiers captured in last week's border skirmish. They're being held in the lower citadel. One of them is gravely injured, infection spreading. Our healers refuse to treat him adequately because he's human, and they don't consider it worth wasting resources." Arin was already reaching for her healer's satchel. "Take me to him, Arin, wait. Lord Carethan is in charge of the prisoners. He won't let you—" "Then we'll see what the prince's life debt is actually worth," Arin said grimly. They found Kaelin in the War Council chamber, standing before a massive map of Ethelmoor with coloured pins marking troop positions. He looked up as they entered, immediately reading the urgency in their faces. "What's wrong?" Arin explained quickly. Kaelin's expression darkened. "Carethan knows better than to let prisoners suffer. That violates the accords of honourable warfare." He strode toward the door. "Come, we'll address this immediately." The lower citadel was a stark contrast to the palace's beauty. Stone walls, iron bars, the smell of unwashed bodies and despair. A dozen human soldiers occupied cells along a dim corridor, and they shrank back as the elven prince appeared, clearly expecting violence. Lord Carethan stood guard, his face twisting with anger when he saw Arin. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "The human healer is here because one of your prisoners is dying of neglect," Kaelin replied coldly. "Show us to him." "With respect, Your Highness, these are enemy combatants. We provide basic sustenance, nothing more. Our resources are better spent on upholding our honor," Kaelin interrupted. "On proving that we are better than the savagery we claim to oppose. Show us to the wounded prisoner. Now." Carethan's jaw clenched, but he couldn't disobey a direct order from the heir to the throne. He led them to the last cell, where a young man, barely 20, lay on a straw pallet shivering with fever. A wound on his leg had turned green and putrid, infection spreading in dark lines up toward his torso. Arin recognized the signs of blood poisoning. Without treatment, he'd be dead within a day. "Open the cell," she ordered. Carethan laughed harshly. "I think not. Let her tend him through the bars if she's so concerned. I need to examine him properly, clean the wound, apply poultices." "I can't do that through iron bars." Arin turned to Kaelin. "Your Highness, as your life debt bearer, I'm asking you to allow me to do what I do best, heal the dying, regardless of which side they fight for." The corridor fell silent. Every guard, every prisoner watched this confrontation. Kaelin studied the dying soldier, then Arin's determined face, then Carethan's hostile stance. "Open the cell," Kaelin commanded. "Lady Arin will treat the prisoner under guard. Lord Carethan, you will provide whatever supplies and assistance she requires." "This is madness," Carethan hissed. "You dishonor your sister's memory by coddling the very humans who—" "My sister died fighting for a cause she believed in." Kaelin's voice cracked like a whip. "She would be ashamed to see us become the monsters our enemies claim we are." "The cell now!" The door opened. Arin entered carefully, aware that the young soldier might lash out in fear or desperation. But when she knelt beside him and he saw her healer's satchel, understanding flickered in his fevered eyes. You're human," he whispered. "I'm a healer," Arin replied gently. "And you're very sick, but I'm going to help you." She worked for 2 hours while Kaelin watched from the cell entrance and Carethan seethed in the corridor. The infection had progressed far. She had to lance the wound, flush it with alcohol that made the soldier scream into the leather strap she gave him to bite, pack it with antibacterial herbs, and then channel her healing magic to help his body fight the poison in his blood. When she finally sat back, exhausted but satisfied, the soldier's fever had broken and his color had improved from death gray to merely pale. He'd need continued treatment, but he would survive. "Thank you," he breathed. "Why would you—" "You're with them." "I'm with healing," Arin said simply. She turned to the other prisoners, who'd been watching in stunned silence. "Are any of you injured or ill?" By the time she finished examining and treating all 12 prisoners, word had spread throughout the citadel. When Arin emerged from the prison level, she found a crowd had gathered. Elven courtiers, servants, guards, all come to see the human healer who treated enemy soldiers as if they were her own people. Kaelin escorted her back to her chambers, dismissing Silvara so they could speak privately. In the sitting room overlooking the forest, he poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. "You've created quite a stir," he said. "Half the court thinks you're a saint. The other half thinks you're dangerously naive. What do you think?" Erin asked, too tired for political games. Kaelin was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkening sky. "I think you're exactly what you claimed to be that night in the cave. Someone who sees past uniforms and allegiances to the suffering beneath. I think you're braver than most warriors I've commanded. And I think—" He turned to face her. "I think you're going to change everything, whether you intend to or not. I'm just one person, Kaelin. I can't end a war by healing a few prisoners. No, but you can show both sides that the other is human. Or in our case, that humans are—" He smiled slightly. "Human, worthy of the same compassion we'd show our own." His expression grew serious. "My father is considering a proposal, a peace delegation to the human capital. A genuine attempt at negotiation, not the empty gestures we've exchanged before. And he wants you to be part of it." Arin's breath caught. "Me? Why?" "Because you're proof that humans and elves can work together. Because your presence in our court has already sparked debate about whether this war can be won, or if it's simply destroying both our peoples. Because—" He hesitated. "Because I recommended you. If we're going to truly negotiate peace, we need someone both sides might actually trust. You've saved my life and treated our enemies with mercy. That's a powerful symbol. It's also incredibly dangerous," Arin pointed out. "There are elves who hate me for being human, and there will be humans who hate me for living among elves. A peace delegation could easily turn into a massacre, I know. That's why I'll be leading it personally. If something goes wrong, better it happens to me than to risk my father or the succession." Kaelin moved closer, his golden eyes intense. "But Arin, this might be our only chance. The war is escalating. Both sides are preparing major offensives for spring. If we don't attempt peace now, thousands more will die, human and elf alike." She thought of Millbrook, of all the small villages caught between armies they never asked for. She thought of the young soldier she'd saved today, and all the others who die in cells or on battlefields because hatred had become habit. She thought of Kaelin himself, wounded and dying in the rain, and how one moment of mercy had led to this impossible opportunity. "When does the delegation leave?" she asked quietly. Relief flooded Kaelin's features. 2 weeks. That gives us time to prepare, to select the right representatives, to craft proposals that might actually be acceptable to both sides." He took her hand, his touch warm. "Thank you, Arin, for saying yes. For being willing to risk everything for peace. I haven't agreed yet," she said, but they both knew she would. She'd already chosen this path the night she saved his life. Everything since had been inevitable consequence. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. King Aldrich announced the peace delegation publicly, causing an uproar that divided the court into factions. Hardliners like Lord Carathan argued that negotiating showed weakness, that humans only understood force. Moderates cautiously supported the attempt while hedging their positions. The younger generation, war-weary and hopeful, embraced the possibility of peace with desperate enthusiasm. Silvara became Arin's constant companion, helping her prepare for the complexities of human-elven diplomacy. They drafted proposals for prisoner exchanges, border agreements, and cultural exchanges. They anticipated objections and crafted responses. And in quiet moments, usually late at night over tea, they talked about simpler things, about Silvara's research into ancient history, about Arin's childhood in Millbrook, about dreams for a future where humans and elves were neighbors rather than enemies. "Do you think it will work?" Silvara asked one evening, 3 days before the delegation's departure. "True peace, I mean." Not just a temporary ceasefire, I don't know, Aaron admitted. But I know that if we don't try, the alternative is unthinkable. Eventually, one side will gain enough advantage to commit atrocity on a scale that makes all previous horrors pale. And then there will be no possibility of peace, only extinction for the losers. The day before departure, Kaelin took Arryn to the Heart Tree, the most sacred place in Silverhaven. It grew at the city's center, a tree even more ancient than the palace, its trunk scarred by countless years, but still living, still green. Elves came here to swear oaths, to seek guidance, to connect with the deep magic of their people. I wanted you to see this, Kaelin said, as they stood before the massive trunk, because tomorrow we're going to ask both our peoples to believe in something they've spent 3 years learning to hate, the possibility that the other side is worth saving. He touched the tree's bark reverently. This tree has stood for over 4,000 years. It survived storms, droughts, even a lightning strike that should have killed it. It survives because it adapts, because it heals, because it refuses to give up. You're saying we need to be like the tree? Erin asked with a slight smile. I'm saying that healing takes time and patience, that scars don't disappear just because we wish them away. But that survival is possible if we're willing to adapt, to grow around our wounds, rather than letting them destroy us. He turned to her. You've taught me that, Arryn, in these past weeks, watching you treat prisoners and learn our language, and face down hostile nobles with nothing but conviction and compassion. You've shown me that the divide between our peoples isn't as insurmountable as I thought. Arryn felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm just doing what I believe is right. That's what makes it matter. Kaelin reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. Tomorrow we ride into uncertainty. We might succeed and change history. We might fail and be killed by the very people we're trying to save. But whatever happens, I want you to know that saving my life did more than create a blood debt. It gave me hope that there was still light in this world worth fighting for. They stood together in the shadow of the ancient tree, two people from warring races holding on to the fragile possibility of peace. Around them, Silverhaven glowed in the twilight, beautiful and alien and achingly alive. The next morning, the peace delegation assembled at dawn. 20 elves, including Kaelin, Silvara, and several nobles, who'd reluctantly agreed to participate. They wore formal, diplomatic attire rather than armor, a statement of intent. Guards accompanied them, but carried weapons ceremonially rather than at the ready. And at the center of it all, Arryn rode on the white horse that had carried her from Millbrook weeks ago, wearing a dress that combined human and elven design elements, a symbol of the bridge they hoped to build. As they passed through Silverhaven's gates, citizens gathered to watch. Some cheered, hopeful for peace. Others were silent, skeptical, or hostile. Arryn saw an old elf woman weeping, clutching a banner that bore the name of a fallen soldier, her son, perhaps, or grandson. The weight of all those lost lives, all that grief and rage, settled on Arryn's shoulders. Second thoughts? Kaelin asked quietly, riding beside her. Constant thoughts, Arryn replied. But I'm still going. The journey toward human territory took 3 days. They traveled under a banner of truce, white cloth marked with both the elven silver tree and the human sun and crown symbol. Scouts reported that human forces had been notified of their approach and were preparing a reception. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a hill and saw the human city of Thornhaven spread before them. It was nothing like Silverhaven's organic beauty. Thornhaven was all stone walls and sharp angles, built for defense rather than harmony with nature. But it was home to 50,000 humans, and somewhere in its crowded streets were people who might listen to reason. At the city gates, a human delegation waited. Arryn recognized the banner of General Marcus Ashford, commander of the Northern Human Forces, and the man responsible for the attack on the accusation hit like a physical blow. Arryn had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for how much it hurt to see betrayal and disappointment in the eyes of a man who'd known her family. My brother died in this war, Arryn said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Just like your soldiers have died. Just like elven families have lost their loved ones. I'm here precisely because I don't want anyone else to become another name on a memorial stone. I'm here because someone has to try to end this, and if that makes me a traitor in your eyes, then so be it. Silence stretched across the space between delegations. Ashford studied her, then Kaelin, then back to Arryn. You really believe peace is possible? He asked finally. I believe the alternative is extinction for both our peoples, Arryn replied. And yes, I believe peace is possible if we're willing to do the hard work of setting aside pride and vengeance long enough to remember that the other side bleeds just like we do. Ashford was quiet for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stepped forward and extended his hand to Kaelin. If Tam Millbrook's little sister believes in you enough to risk everything, then I'll at least hear what you have to say. Kaelin clasped the offered hand, and in that simple gesture, Arryn felt the first fragile thread of hope take hold. They were escorted into Thornhaven, to a neutral meeting hall that had been prepared for negotiations. Over the following days, they talked. They argued. They shouted and stormed out and reluctantly returned to the table. They discussed borders and prisoners and reparations and sacred sites. Progress was agonizingly slow, trust paper thin, but they talked. And in the evenings, when formal negotiations ended, Arryn found herself moving between both delegations, healing old wounds and listening to stories from both sides. She heard about elven families displaced by human expansion and human villages burned in retaliation. She heard about cultural misunderstandings that had escalated into violence, about fear and pride and the terrible momentum of war. On the seventh day, something shifted.